At 6, embryo adoption. 1 in 10 couples in the United States is infertile, and more of them are seeking help through in vitro fertilization. Now, that process yields multiple embryos, often many more than needed. That means couples who undergo IVF have to decide what to do with their leftover embryos. One option is to donate them. 10 TV's Jessica Goddard reports on the emerging trend and introduces us to an Ohio couple. They call it the answer to their prayers.
Andrea and Jesse Preston are college sweethearts. They married soon after graduation with the hopes of having children and starting a family.
After about a year or two of being married, we thought it would be time to think about it. And then about 5 years later, it still hadn't happened, so it was a long journey.
After years of trying and dozens of tests, the Prestons were ultimately diagnosed with unexplained infertility. Medication and fertility treatment led to disappointment after disappointment.
And Andrea said that she'd come across something called embryo adoption, and I immediately got excited. I was so thrilled. I thought, this is it.
Embryo donation is the transfer of unused embryos from a couple who no longer needs them to people who want them. The donor couple's embryos are implanted into a woman in hope of becoming pregnant and carrying a baby to term.
More and more people are deciding to have their unused embryos transferred to other families. 1,019 in 2011, up from 933 in 2010. And more than 1/3 of those resulted in the birth of at least one child.
Fewer than 10 states have any statute on embryo donation. In Ohio, the recipients are considered the legal parents of the child at birth.
And this is still what we call gray area. It's still uncharted law.
Adoption attorney Tommy Taneff says in the eyes of the law, an embryo donation is a transfer of property, and the law hasn't yet caught up to the science.
But essentially, that embryo or that egg or that sperm is considered property.
Fertility specialist Dr. Beth Kennard says while it is a growing trend, it is still a relatively rare procedure at Ohio Reproductive Medicine and across the country.
Well, it's not very common. We may have 1 or 2 or 3 in a year, and we do several hundred IVF cycles, so it's not very common.
Just like traditional adoption, embryo donation can be open or closed. The Prestons received 5 embryos from an anonymous donor couple with just a 43% chance of becoming pregnant.
Hi. Hi, Dada.
9 months later, the baby they'd yearned for years was born. A boy they named Silas.
I think the one thing that helped with this process for me was that whatever the outcome, I felt like the 5 embryos that we adopted were not frozen anymore and were kind of released from that.
Now a toddler learning to walk and talk that finally gave them a family. Jessica Goddard, 10 TV News.
What a beautiful child. Embryo donation is available through both medical and faith-based matching programs. The practices and restrictions vary considerably, as does the cost, which generally ranges from $5,000 to upwards of $18,000.